Hello and welcome to Streaming Media East Connect, our biggest virtual event yet. We've got 33 panels, presentations covering everything from production and coding and advertising technology to all manner of OTT related topics and everything in between, including the topic of this session this morning, focusing on 5G. As always, all of our sessions will be available within a couple of days on the Streaming Media YouTube channel. And we will also be posting a link to them in the conferences tab or the videos tab on streamingmedia.com. Before we jump into this session, I'd like to thank our diamond sponsor, Signient, and we have a brief video to share from them.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on.
Pick it up, it's good.
Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signient. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signient handles the rest. Get started on your Media Shuttle journey today, a journey without limits.
And I'd also like to thank the sponsor of this session, Zixi. And Zixi's Eric Bolten will be joining us in just a moment. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are going to ask audience members to submit questions using the Q&A tab rather than the chat. That makes it easier for us to keep track of them. If you put them in the chat, we'll probably see them, but putting them in the Q&A tab guarantees that we'll see them there. So if you could do that, I appreciate it. And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that we are hoping and planning on having Streaming Media West in person in Huntington Beach in November, which sounds to me like a pretty darn good place to be. So as a friend of mine in the South likes to say, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, that's the plan. And we are full force ahead with Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach in November. So this session is called 5G Game Changer or And clearly there's a lot of confusion out there about what 5G actually means for consumers, for video delivery, for video production. But I'm fairly confident that you will leave this session understanding that 5G is definitely not meh, it's a lot more than that. And we've got two great people here to talk about that today. From Zixi, we have Eric Bolten. And Eric, join us, please. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much, Eric.
And Eric is zooming in from Patagonia, Chile. So I believe he takes the record for the person zooming in from the farthest distance.
Nice
and
to
Jason
win a
Thibeault,
prize early in the game.
Yeah, you win the prize. And Jason Thibeault, JT, from the Streaming Video Alliance. JT, how are you?
Hey, everybody. Doing well. Thanks,
Good.
Eric.
So we should probably start by doing sort of a level set on what 5G means and all the areas where it's really going to impact almost everyone who's probably watching this webinar today. And Zixi put together a great slide, and they talk about something they call the 5 C's. So I'm going to share that slide now. And Eric, why don't you kind of walk us through what the implications are?
Happy to do so. So we've been very active in the 5G space and taken it as a strategic initiative. And one of the things that became clear is in all of the world of 5G, there are in fact 5 C's that correlate it, and in particular in the business to business mode. I think most folks tend to think about this as a direct consumer, which it obviously is, but the business to business impact is actually going to be quite transformative, and we'll obviously go through that. So first, there's got to be a content provider of some type, some major media company that's generating the content that we need to engage in the 5G service. But less understood is that you actually need a cloud participation. So you will have an area of a MEC, and say in Amazon's case, where you have normal AWS instances, you have a specialized area of the cloud called the wavelength zone, and you will see that as you move towards this mobile access edge compute dynamic. Then, of course, you have to have the carrier in the backbone, and that will be a Verizon, an AT&T, something like that, and then the cellular of the radio network. And the radio network is actually working in conjunction with the carrier backbone and the cloud to ultimately enable this towards a consumer. And what you're getting is a very large scale. We know the promise of 5G is super large scale bit rates, but we're talking at a cell tower level of about 5 gigabits of throughput and latencies measured at sub 100 milliseconds. So this mixture of these 5 Cs is going to enable a very large transformation within the B2B aspects of media and entertainment.
And that's really what we're going to focus on for the remainder of this conversation. It's not so much, I got 5G on my phone, but I'm not really noticing any difference. Although we'll get to a little bit of that and why consumers will notice something and many things in the future. But let's start by looking at, I guess, 3 of these 5Gs in particular: content, cellular, and consumer. Let's start with content. Eric, can you talk about what's happening right now? How is 5G impacting the production and delivery of content? And JT, I know you'll have things to say, particularly about delivery, and maybe talk about some real world examples.
So it's been interesting. If I were to take an over-under bet on the topic, I would have predicted last year that we'd be going into production and studio everywhere constructs with untethered ability and access to content. And while that is actually happening as we speak right now, our clients in the base delivery took the first slot. And these two things are sort of intricately related, but we are watching 5G move itself in real time, and we are in a commercial production pilot that will be in full production within the next coming weeks for delivery to 500 head ends, and watching how that there are options to get off satellite, an augmentation of what IP terrestrial truly means, because 5G represents effectively a fourth network to add to this. But the production is also very exciting. We did some of the early first proof of concept testing last year. We were able to do 8K at 100 megabits in 50 frames. And that's just a beautiful picture, but very transformative, and just gives people with the content a lot more options to curate and make an entirely different immersive experience. And then ultimately how that gets delivered is changing fundamentally, but we'll talk about that as the time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll add to that. I think, especially from our member, our constituent member companies, I think what we're seeing is, 5G is in this state right now from a content perspective of, where does it apply most, right? So I think that, on the consumer side, it doesn't necessarily apply just yet. Because there's, that 5G saturation on the handsets, and obviously we'll get into that later with the C for consumer, it's not there yet. And so I think what we're seeing from, again, from our member companies is how can I leverage 5G to capture video content better from, wireless broadcasting? How can I get it faster? Like what Eric said, sort of get rid of satellite, go IP, it's much cheaper. How can I use it for that? So we're seeing, companies, not necessarily experimenting, but trying to figure out how to use the technology for those specific use cases. And Eric can talk about this. The arena is like perfect, right? You have 5G cameras, you have a 5G, a very, very, sequestered place that has lots of picocells in it. So it's 5G ultra wideband. So you've got content flowing everywhere. It's going to people. And I think we're starting to see that as sort of the use case. And, it'll be interesting to see how that expands out further.
So what might we see coming soon? I mean, you talked about sort of long-term trends, but what are some of the things that we're going to see happening in the near term when it comes to the content side of things?
Well, I'll kick that off with, watching as Jason has said, having these infrastructures available and fully deployable is kind of where you're going to see it as 5G in its ultra wideband form starts to be rolled out past 30, 40, 50, 100 different cities. you're going to have infrastructures available, and you have a very new and migratory audience that wants to see things in a different way. And I think one of the big leverage points will be utilizing those infrastructures to highlight how transformative 5G can be. So why am I going to go to the stadium and to the ballpark? Because there's an infrastructure there that I can't get in my home. And suddenly tailgating starts to take on an entirely different perspective on things. Like typically when people had thought about 5G in its initial rollout, very consumer, very IoT, perhaps some AR, VR within the manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to turn, you're outside a stadium and you're going to be able to have access to players, inside views, AR, VR pieces, in addition to just separate broadcasts that can be within that, both within the venue and between venues. And that's going to, and I think that will set the stage for what consumer expectations are as this larger rollout comes out, and a huge opportunity for numerous business models, advertising and targeting and geo data and just all sorts of things. But it's that is already in place, and we are actively involved with a major sports league doing exactly this and seeing what does up and down time and latency mean, like, because you're going to be now inside the stadium, it's practically instantaneous. It's faster than nuclear. So I mean, I'll let Jason continue.
Yeah, I mean, and exactly, that's I think the use case that we're seeing right now, I think the big thing where I understand that 5G, especially in an arena, ultra wideband, promises what Eric talked about before, like zero latency. Now, obviously, when we're talking about getting content from the camera to the handsets that are in that arena, we still have the latency that's in the streaming workflow, right? So we've still got some, but when you start combining 5G, so 5G ultra wideband with, like, let's say low latency CMAF or WebRTC, right? So I think the big use case in arena for 5G is going to be betting, right? You're going to have people there in arena watching the game, placing bets like in there on their handset, and you can't have any latency, and 5G gives us that, right? I think we always talk about the bandwidth, like, so it's going to be huge. But the thing is that, on a mobile phone, video wise, from a streaming perspective, you don't visually notice any difference between, 720p really and 4K. Like it just doesn't display differently. And so there's no need to send that kind of, you don't need the bandwidth. You really it's all about the latency. How fast can I get it to somebody in the arena? 5G ultra wideband, massive immersive opportunity. Betting. Like, I think that's where it's going to really hit home first. It's like, wow, we can give people a truly real-time content experience with 5G. That, this is amazing. And I think betting is going to probably drive that first use case. And that's, I mean, obviously my opinion, but.
Well, I'll completely back that opinion up, JT, because the whole point here is that the NHL and NFL have announced that they will be doing betting and gaming. And to your point, a couple things that 5G brings to the table and why it's going to transform is, one, what we're describing is, being able to take care of very specific areas. So an arena, and then you go to the sports book and you're at Wynn or wherever you are in Caesars or Macau, pick your poison, because you can go global with this. And you can have real-time betting. Latency is critical because you're going to have to maintain within gaming things, but synchronized and synchronicity of windows so that things can't get too far out of whack, and that's controlled. And the other thing that 5G has, and why it's a business-to-business technology versus, say, 4G LTE, will be network slicing. And the idea that I can carve out a quality of service. So where before, I go to the game and surprisingly can't make a text or see a video or do anything, now you're going to have actually dedicated areas of service that are going to allow all of that, facilitate that. And, you're going to be betting on third down, run or pass. And
yeah, it's exact that kind of granularity of betting. I think it's going to be, honestly, it's going to be amazing. And the cool thing too, like you say, the B2B, I really think that as technology evolves and improves on the cameras themselves, and you start to get 5G enabled cameras, 5G ultra wideband enabled cameras, you really sort of, to be honest, you can cut out the cables, right? You can cut out the truck, having to go through the truck. You can now have people doing remote production. You can have people, produce, because this content can get to them so fast in such a massive, in a bandwidth pipeline, right? So you can deliver 8K master content to some editing facility, and they're getting this in real time, and they're making change, boom, 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 done, and it's out. It's going into streaming in multiple formats. I mean, that to me is amazing in terms of what it will do for content production.
No, and let's continue that thread. So what's been very interesting is we did the first 4K UHD streaming and direct to a Samsung with Bloomberg. And now we've got folks like the NHL pulling 4K out. And it's very interesting because while the resolution doesn't seem like it matters, it actually does. Because the graphic detail and the pieces that you can see on a 4K are in fact noticeable. Like there might be HD in the center, but there's not enough 4K content to truly vet it. But when you want to look at statistics and numbers and things on phones, particularly those of us of a certain age who don't see that well, pushing that part out. But we are watching now where that idea that you just said, without a truck, without a piece, you're going to be able now, the COVID pandemic certainly pushed forward remote live production in a huge way.
Yep.
And we have tools in our Zen Master and things to do control planes, but teams can work remotely, single 4K, and you can isolate in that area and get the equivalent as if you had multi-camera feeds, because you can zoom in, zoom out without actually loss of integrity. So very interesting of what that means in a production scenario, in a professional broadcast scenario, because you can carve out that content in different ways and the way the consumer is going to interact with it.
No, and that's a good point. I mean, when I say, the visual quality, there's not that real distinction on a mobile phone screen. No, but if you start talking about pixel density and being able to drill down and zoom in on things, yes, right, you're going to want a 4K feed to the phone. And I think that's where, 5G will help sort of unlock some of those opportunities that we don't see right now, because we don't have the depth of pixels that we can deliver, and have that as sort of that kind of like that multi-camera experience.
So, and even then, and then the expansion of venues. So one of the things we also saw is the idea that live events, want to go to places like theaters. Yep. And 5G will be very interesting for that if I could go in and watch a playoff game that I would never get tickets to on a giant screen, and someone gives me a nice steak and a good glass of wine, and I'm making bets, that starts to get, there's going to be a big tab at the end of that event.
Absolutely.
But those are going, but all of that infrastructure is actually in place and very eminently deployable. We're not trying to run across millions of square miles, which we eventually will get to. And that will be in things like ATSC 3.0 and 5G as a hub and spoke to that. Because I'm, I have a lot of questions of ATSC being marketing hype, but I think it was just the building blocks of the infrastructure, not hype. And just, we're going to suddenly be in a very, very wireless world in an OTA kind of environment.
No, that's if I can go from, let's say, 8K 5G, right? That hub, it comes in and it's spoking out to, ATSC 3.0 broadcast centers, and it's, going out 4K or, small, depending on what it is, but it's hitting those TVs, OTA. I mean, that's awesome, right? You're really sort of cutting out the physical connection. It's great.
And then think about this, like all of us are obviously within the industry, but not many people have ever seen an actual 25 megabit stream that you would get, let alone bigger than that. When you're in a truck and you see that live, like, wow, that HD is much better than I thought, because 3 megabits at my set-top box isn't so impressive. This is going to open up and allow both home, like the production quality will be there, but you're going to have things like you said, that you won't be transferring a file as though that'll exist forever. But you'll also have the stream to store. You'll be able to allow this content to flow very quickly because, again, the attention for eyeballs is at an all-time high. I mean, you're trying to gain attention to a modern generation that may not feel it has to be at somewhere at 1 o'clock on a Sunday.
That's right.
We're going to move on to talk about that rollout, but we've already got some questions streaming in, so to speak, from the audience, and I'd like to make sure we hit some of those before they all pile up. Chris Chinnock mentions, Eric, you mentioned an 8K 50p 100 megabit per second demo. Can you talk any more about that? Any more details?
Yeah, last year we were working with Verizon Innovation Lab, and there's not a lot of 8K content. So we recorded a very fine violinist out of the University of Texas at Austin, and we got a couple of pieces, and we just wanted to kind of, we're admittedly on the speed lap track, but we wanted to see how far could we go and what could we do? And we were able to, when you have a big fat pipe, 100 megabits, is not a restricting factor. I think that's the bigger deal. It could be in a Zixi context, any payload underneath that. That could be one channel, that could be 10 channels. That depends what you want to do. And like I said, we're in the process right now of seeing what the upper boundary is of that. Is it 5 gig, 2 gigs, 4 gigs, 5 gigs, and that sort of thing. So again, you've got cameras to get there. We're still playing off disk. Like, are you at live 8K? You're working there. But what you do notice is 8K is what 3D should have been. 3D was not the thing we all hoped for many reasons we don't need to get into. But in 8K, it's very much the pixel density that you think that you're talking to somebody in another room, and then you add in the audio aspects and all of that. It's quite promising. We still have a lot to do with 4K, but 8K will find its specialized way there right away.
It's funny. I did a panel at NAB like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even longer, with New Lion. And I came up and I just said, like, 4K is dead. Just work on 8K. Like, 4K is a stepping stone. That's really funny. Yet pixel density is everything.
Yeah.
The next question is packet jitter a concern for streaming reliability over 5G?
Great question.
Yeah.
I'll just say, in our experience, what we found is, 5G is a messier place than people expected, and it needs some protection. Despite all the parts, it has a complex set of signal paths, and you've got raw power, but your friend's jitter and packet loss need to be addressed to ensure the quality of experience and service that you would expect.
Yep.
Okay, we've got a few more questions. I'm going to hit on a couple and then we'll get back to our discussion, and I'll save them for later. Many live streams have been done in Ethernet, are being done in Ethernet and Wi-Fi. So many of us are doing gigabit streams with unlimited internet plans. I can clearly see all the benefits and innovation we can bring to our customers, but how much more expensive will it be to stream content, and how can we price this?
You want to start, JT?
I don't know if I want to touch that question with a 10-foot pole. That's a really difficult question to answer, right? There are going to be, I would say, innovative data package plans that come along with 5G. So for right now, I've got an iPhone 12, I've got 5G ultra wideband, and my carrier's Verizon, and they give it to me for free. Like, so ultra wideband costs $10 more a month, and they're like, you get a $10 credit every month, because there's just not anything to do with it yet. Will that change, like, in the future? So will Verizon realize, whoa, all of a sudden we've got all these people on 5G. This is something that we can make more money selling a different experience for. Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. And the only answer I say is we're just going to see how it plays out.
I will say this, that take your Verizon example, which is a very one, since we work so closely with our great partner. You've got the consumer side, which you're already paying into, and we can see what those in unlimited data gets interesting when you start talking about, gigabit transfers. But in the B2B level, you've got cloud, you've got egress, the amount of investment on this, I think this is going to be about scale. And then I go back to the network slicing so that you can really manage how you do that. But if you look at Verizon's commitment to this, they publicly stated, I think it was 18 billion in just dedicated backbone fiber for 5G traffic only, approximately 50 billion in acquiring spectrum, and that's just one US telco. So this is considered a strategic asset at a business level and even at a company level. I mean, you look at China, they've freed up the entire C-band spectrum. They're not withholding any of that. Europe's got its full strategy. So I think that what you'll see is just favorable unit costs as volume scale, and you'll see a bit of commercial packaging to ensure that adoption happens.
You can also look at what you said at the slicing, right? So one could say that at some point carriers may look at sort of priority slicing, right? So, okay, so we'll give this, like at this package or tier, you get, basically better service or reliability than you do at this package or tier. So I think the investment is there. Obviously, companies are going to want to recoup their investment. So the question becomes is what kind of packages, commercial packages, can you develop to do that without undermining adoption, like you said?
But I think you're migrating an enormous net new level of business.
Yeah.
And you will also have the benefit of 4G LTE. And as the question came in, bonding is your friend, right? So we need to do bonding, but you're going to be able to, when we're running these signal paths, we have the 5G ultra wideband, we have 4G LTE, which is still pretty damn robust, but you can't slice it. and you have the plain old internet to always back you up and be your friend. So you put all of that together, and you're basically getting a lot more close to ubiquitous IP access, which in building the tools around that.
All right, let's jump ahead and talk a little bit about the rollout, about the cellular piece of the five C's of 5G. How's the rollout going? I mean, I know we've seen some specialty market rollout. We've seen some things at Levi's Stadium, and we've seen some things in Vegas. Can you talk about some real world examples of where it's been rolled out and what's happened there?
I'll pick that up to start. Certainly, these guys publish and push it out. Major cities, major markets, I believe 30 is the target of this year, which is a lot of markets when you think about it. You've got Boston and New York and Washington, and you say Vegas and LA and San Francisco and Florida places in Miami, et cetera. I think that part of this has to do with what we started the conversation about: infrastructures, venues, city. I think public areas are going to become, very different. You're going to walk through Times Square with access to things that you just never had. So I think a lot of this has to do with introducing and allowing the realm of the possible to be experienced by the consumer, and for us in our side of the industry to start to utilize and leverage this infrastructure and how we're going to produce and deliver all that content. So I see that it's a lot faster to roll out radio than it is to roll a bunch of cables, whether it's glass or copper. And so ultimately, this is going to push fairly quickly. And we also touched on, the ATSC 3.0 stuff is going to just extend that reach even further and faster. So a lot of moving parts that are all coming together at the same time.
I'll be the naysayer. So not for a while. So the rollout is very limited right now, especially for millimeter wave technology. So that's what ultra wideband is, right? And that allows that big pipe. You go to fast.com and you're hitting like 700 megabits per second on your mobile phone. Like that's, whoa, that rollout is very limited right now. And the reason for that is because it takes the cells must be placed in a much more saturated environment, right? That the millimeter wave technology has a very short distance because of the frequency. And so you have to have a lot more cells placed around something. So you have to really like place picocells, and they can be tiny little things, right? You have to have them everywhere. I mean, they're really talking about them sort of, line of sight on the pole. So that kind of saturation, I mean, it just takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of buy-in from the cities, right? So you've got small townships or even big cities who say like, yeah, we don't really want to do that right now. Or, hey, we want to do that, but we want a cut of something because you're asking to put cells up everywhere. And we don't need that, right? People have cellular communications. We have towers. We're good to go. So I think that the rollout is happening in certain markets that it makes a lot of sense. Like Vegas. Yes. Betting. Let's put a lot of picocells there. Or it's happening in arenas. Again, closed environment. You don't have to talk to anybody. You just be like, hey, arena, let's partner. We're Verizon. We want to do this. It's going to be awesome. And the arena says, thumbs up, we're in. So I think we're seeing that. And then to what Eric said is that consumers are going to go to these places and have this amazing content experience on their phone. Like, wow, why can't I get this at home? And mind you, I live, in an AT&T market. I live in Dallas, and I'm on Verizon. So obviously they're sharing, but I happen upon an ultra wideband area, like once in a blue moon. Like, it's just like, oh my gosh, it's ultra wideband. And then I start like doing as much as I possibly can while I'm there and watching every piece of content I can. But again, it's such a small, limited area. So it is happening. It's just not going to happen as fast as we want it to, which is why the B2B part of it is so important, right? All that infrastructure, that's what's really driving this. The sort of cellular, the bridge from B2B to the consumer is just going to happen a bit more slowly for that really wideband stuff.
Well, we've got a follow-up question, and you answered the next question that we were going to get to, which is why isn't it happening everywhere? And that's why. But are you seeing any studios or major content creators installing picocells for production?
Ooh, not that I know of personally. I think I would assume that's probably happening somewhere. But that's a really cool idea if it's not.
Right.
Are you seeing it, Eric, at all?
No, like I said, I'm watching more live sports, and pieces tend to drive that. I think, news and studio will soon follow. They have less ability to monetize that investment immediately, which sports obviously can do. But again, it's going to become a quick hop, skip, and a jump for if I'm taking live hockey, for example, and bringing it to a theater, that's great. I very quickly could put that in on Broadway, and I can very quickly, add in other events. So, well, as our industry keeps moving, I mean, we woke up this morning to see Warner Media and Discovery together. Are we going to be tracking cheetahs with 5G? Probably.
Actually, yeah, that's a great idea. Absolutely.
I like a nice 5G mesh network on the Serengeti.
Well, and it makes sense. Like, look at Disney Studios in Burbank, right? Why wouldn't they just call up Verizon or somebody and say, hey, can you come and help us? Like, let's saturate the heck out of our studios so that we have a true 5G ultra wideband mesh network. And now when we're doing stuff in studio, that content can be like out on Signiant, like going super fast everywhere, right? So there's just some really cool stuff that I think could be possible. That's a great question. I'm going to actually look in and see if anybody is doing that.
No, and I think you would expect, because as you're saying, you're going to go Warner Brothers, Universal, Disney, Paramount, and you're done.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of saturation, we've all been saturated, and we've sung Verizon's praises a lot here, but so I'm not criticizing them, but we've all been saturated with Verizon's ads telling us how great 5G is, right? As consumers. I think I saw 6 or 7 of them on YouTube last night. Maybe it was because I was researching this panel beforehand.
Yes.
But I mean, are consumers experiencing the true power of 5G yet?
Well, I'm going to say no. Like, I just, from my personal experience, right? iPhone 12, I got a 5G radio. I hit 5G a lot of places. To be honest, the bandwidth test I do when I go to fast.com, it's worse than 4G LTE. Like, it's just, it hangs. Like, what's going on? I'm on 5G. I hit 5G UW. That's through the roof amazing. But the regular 5G, so I think there's a lot of confusion, and a lot of that initial 5G rollout that came was really just sort of a layering on top of the 4G LTE. That's what T-Mobile got in trouble for, right? When they came out and said we're 5G, and they're like, the FCC went, no, you're not. That's really just 4G LTE with a little 5G moniker on it. And it was funny. I was in Vegas talking to a bartender, and he showed me his phone. He goes, look, I've got 5G. And I'm like, wait a minute, you have an iPhone 10. Like, you need a new radio in your phone. You can't get 5G on that phone. He was like, what? So I think there's a lot of misconception and communication right now about what is 5G and what isn't 5G, and really 5G and not really 5G. So no, I don't think consumers are going to really experience the magnificence, and that's a strong word, of 5G until ultra wideband is prevalent.
And I'll completely agree with that. In the US, in some level of somebody's wisdom somewhere, decided that the definition of 5G was, if it's not 4G, then it could be considered 5G. So if you go to other countries, that definition's a little stricter. Certainly some marketing license there. But, as JT points out, the ultra wideband is different. I think you're going to see that get really pressed. Again, you got a lot of market pressure to get this rolled out. I mean, that's kind of where the thing I'm staring at is it's not like it's an adoption issue. It's a rollout issue. And so there's nothing but incentive to press that. And let's take a look. So Verizon has done a fantastic job of marketing, and I think explaining too, because does it really describe when you go from 4 to 5, like what you're really getting? And as you said, it's not a step change. It's a multiplier effect of what's really available. So people are there. Any accident that AT&T has spun out the Warner Media side to focus, because that's how important the stakes of this game are. So I'm going to watch some very large scale companies that normally you would not consider quite nimble. This is an existential thing. I mean, this is in a very large land grab, and then going to come down, and you got 3 major players, at least at the forefront of it, let alone some private players that own certain things.
So what's the end game here? What's the end goal? What does a world look like that is connected together via 5G?
We all die of brain cancer.
Well, yes.
No,
and now that we've got our vaccines, we've all got the
talk about too soon. We haven't even got it there.
No, I mean, it's it's something that Eric described earlier on, right? It's immersive opportunity, right? Things can, it's not just about pixel density. It's not just about bandwidth. It's about latency, right? So when you start looking at the applications that can get pushed out further and further towards the consumer devices themselves because of 5G, right? That's the mech, right? Get it out there into the mist and the fog, get it as close to the device as possible, just obviously what will make autonomous cars possible. But it's just, that's really cool. You can have truly amazing interactive experiences, at a high quality. So you're not sacrificing the pixel density for the immersion, right? You've got enough bandwidth to do both. And then you have the real time back and forth. And I think that's what it looks like. It looks like people consuming not just content, but content in different ways. It's no longer just, pushing content to you. Just watch this movie. Okay, that's great. It's in, 1080p HDR. Woo, it looks awesome. Okay, but what else can I do with that? Where can I engage the consumer that they're no longer tapping or pressing something and having to wait 5 seconds, for it to respond? So I think that's what the world looks like when we're all connected, is that it's much more content at a higher quality flowing faster bi-directionally, not just to the consumer.
No, and so completely agree. And it is a very interesting part because this is, we've had an internet, which has been obviously super successful, which seems obvious, but 30 years ago was not that straightforward. And you've got this advent of cloud and virtualization. And now we're adding in really backbones that are like, we're learning between, say, picking on the Verizon Amazon partnership, how does a wavelength zone go to a carrier very low? And then you have someone like us with Zixi, you need a software layer across all of that. And one of the things that we've been figuring out was those signal paths jump. You need to have a lot of different ways to handle and manage that streaming. And you've got a lot of data that's going on. So we, when we're looking at this control, operating that, why is this migration in the possible world of 5G starting in media and entertainment? Because it's a very expensive payload. It is the business. It's not a communications tool to do a town hall, not that those aren't important, but it's the product they're selling. And as Jason points out, this bi-directional opens up a lot. 5G will be the enabling part for autonomous vehicles. But what does that mean in a future consumer world? The family gets in, they go to grandma's house, swipe the card, and there's Frozen on the way because the car is tricked out to be a display device, not a car. And you're not even going to be facing outside, be facing inside. And we saw that. CES has been doing this now pretty progressively for the last 3 years. We didn't get to see it in 2020, but we know where that's, or 2021, we know where that's going. And then you take that, and as video becomes ubiquitous, one of the things that Zixi we're working on is how do you do the data harvest across that and put an intelligent data platform. So AI/ML is going to work in concert with 5G for how do you actually do real-time interaction of both the data, the video expectation. 10 years ago, people went to the website and their expectation of the video there was blocky, start, stop, buffering, caching. This generation alpha expects perfect. They're going to expect 4K and 8K. They're going to expect interaction, and there'll be cameras everywhere. You're going to get into smart cities. You're going to have, for the cars that are being driven by carbon-based life forms, someone has to take a picture of them and make sure you don't hit the other ones. And so all of this stuff is going to be there. And think of what that means from geo data and interaction. So, at one generational level, no, I don't know if I want to have all my privacy, et cetera, there. The modern generation, I expect the ad to be perfect, the content to be perfect, the quality to be perfect. And it's going to be, you're going to get in 5 years from now, like we're not talking about far, but 5 years from now, you're going to be just bathing in unlimited network. And what does that mean?
And I'm going to add something to that, because we both talked about this sort of utopia coming forward. It's like, this is what the world's going to look like. People go like, oh, when's that going to happen? Okay, so let's talking about something more practical. So when the world is wired on 5G, what does that mean for media and broadcast? The death of satellite backhaul. That is a huge cost savings for media broadcast companies, hands down. You stop sending stuff up and down. The cost of satellite backhaul is ridiculous. But if you have a truly massive wireless 5G pipe that you can push content around via IP, that is a tremendous savings for the media and broadcast industry. That's a huge, that's like a tangible impact to the bottom line. So I think that's what we're really going to see first, is finally the transition from QAM and SDI to IP. really is going to be enabled by 5G. It's going to be like that. That's the final nail in the coffin of the old way of doing things is 5G when everything gets connected.
Well,
So,
and
we're
of course,
seeing that now.
That's right.
Sorry to interrupt, Eric, but we're
No.
seeing that now. And I got people who are going in, like I said, those 500 MSOs, there's like 4 billion US market in just satellite in the M&E space.
It's
And
ridiculous.
So that's significant cash.
Yep.
And it's not just about changing the price point. You're not just taking one single broadcast and then going to everybody. You're going to be able to target your ads and target your programming, have a given brand, have sub brands, and you're going to be literally curating that edge on any kind of AIML systems, and that expectation of what the back end is has to be equally as nimble and agile, and that's coming.
well, it wouldn't be a panel about 5G or a discussion about 5G if we didn't have some skeptics. And I know we're going to go into talking about the infrastructure that's going to be required to make this all happen. But Michael Graves mentions in the chat, if you need tiny sites within line of sight served by fiber, you're de facto pulling fiber to near every home. Fiber to the home trumps 5G every time.
Yeah. So
Thoughts?
what you can actually, you can have fiber to the DSLAM, and then you can use a hub and spoke model to get that out. So you're basically daisy chaining out to the other 5G pico cells to get to basically what would be fixed line of sight to the home, right? So the ideal situation here is I have a 5G router in my house, and it services both my mobile phone and my Wi-Fi. And I don't need to have fiber to my house to necessarily serve that, as long as I have line of sight to the pole, and then the pole goes to the pole, to the pole, to the DSLAM, to the fiber, and I'm good to go. So I think that's probably there's going to be a workaround. We're not going to lay fiber everywhere. Google has already proven that that's a bad model, and it's really expensive, and it's just not going to happen. So the smaller mesh network, the 5G mesh network, will basically make that, that's the workaround to laying fiber to everybody. You can just sort of, daisy chain it to the fixed line of sight to the 5G modem in the house.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I'd say we're watching, look, we deal with fiber every day. And I kind of wanted to joke, like get t-shirts that said fiber, the big lie. I mean, everybody wants to say, oh, fiber fixes everything and does all my video. It doesn't. It's a dirty circuit. Things happen. It's hard to keep that stuff running. Yes, you get a lot of internet to a given home, but the commercial is, Jason just said that the commercial reality of running it everywhere is a proven no-go. It's not going to happen. So I think what the bigger issue is that you're mixing all these together, and it's the creative aspect of this that I think accelerates the whole process.
And to be honest, with better multiplexers, there's a lot of bandwidth, a tremendous amount of bandwidth to be had in both twisted copper and coaxial. So there are other fibers already laid that we will hopefully get to use later on. But again, once you've got this sort of mesh 5G network and you've got routers that can see the pole and they connect to it, then like, what do I need fiber for?
And someone else actually mentioned that in the Q&A and said, so far you've been talking about mobile devices, which I agree do need high video bit rates and resolutions. But what about using 5G routers as hotspots instead of telco last mile wires and fiber?
That's my nirvana. Like I want one of, and I've been checking Verizon. Like I'm like, sign me up as soon as you guys have a fixed 5G in my area. Please come and install it. I want that router because I really want to get rid of like the problem. Like for me, it's funny. Spectrum strings a cable over the alleyway in my house, and it's kind of a crapshoot of whether or not the recycling truck coming in and taking out my cable so that I don't have internet. And I've had to go out there and reconnect it myself. Get rid of all that garbage. Like just give me fixed 5G.
And again, we have the benefit of having tested this in the production pilot. So we fried a bunch of 5G routers when we started. We toasted them because they were consumer grade, and now they're finally I think we caught the industry a little by surprise because they weren't ready for industrial. And we happen to be using these cradle points, and we're getting a gig on. So that's coming, and you're gonna, again, this is gonna, what will happen is you'll get used to it and you will never want to take it away.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yep.
No way. You're gonna be like, and just, it's everywhere. And yep, chipsets are coming, 5G routers are coming, we're rolling them out. you still, line of sight issues, all the towers are going to put in. I get it. But there's just too much commercial requirement to go to market to not flush those things out.
Yeah, the ball is rolling downhill. It may be a little slow right now, but it's picking up speed.
That's right.
JT, maybe you could help sort of sum up. We've talked, you both have talked a lot about the technical components and the infrastructure that's required to make 5G happen. But if we're talking about 5G for B2B, what infrastructure do I need to make 5G a reality for my company?
Oh, actually, I'm gonna punt to Eric on that one. I actually think he will have more insight into what that, because this is what they're doing. They're working in this space.
No, I appreciate that. Well, as we said in our 5Cs world, where we start, someone's got an encoded signal somewhere. Typically, that can be originated off a 5G access point where you're producing live, but also in live linear, and you're going to be playing out through your cloud infrastructure. That then hops into your equivalent of a wavelength zone in the MEC, wherever my multi-access edge compute is. And then what we've learned is you can have MEC and fiber and RAN and the cellular radio network can be in different locations and geographies, which is very helpful and extends how fast you can roll it out. But you're going to need, starting in the encode, starting in the linear, understanding how your cloud and environment virtualizes, understanding which partner you are going to pick in the telco space. Verizon's the only one with a MEC architecture that I know of in the States right now. And then how do I get to 5G routers and the devices that I will require? And that drops off to IRDs and to set-top boxes and to display to screen. So there's a lot of pieces there. And obviously, at working for Zixi, I have a slight bias, but you need a software layer across that, because you need, now things got more complex. Your requirement of visibility, the ability to have a control plane like ours in Master to see the atomic data, understand and share, because there's more partners in the supply chain than less. And you've got to understand like how low latency that encode is and how many different parts am I getting to, and standard broadcast things, and with much more distributed teams that are still not pandemic ready. So like this is really happening, but everybody through 2020 learned how to work remotely. Not that we hadn't, but to run professional broadcast at that level was a pretty big jump up. And I think now that we know how to do it, we're only going to get better at doing it. And 5G is just, the icing on the cake, because suddenly you don't need to run Ethernet and fiber and pieces, and you're not tethered in what you want to make and where you want to put it.
And I'll add, the one thing I'll add to that is there needs to be a bridge between cloud and MEC. So, and that's happening, right? So we see Amazon. So Amazon started out with Lambda functions, right? So the idea was you moved from virtualized instances to sort of being cloud native. Now they've pushed it even further so that you've got cloud functions, and it's even closer to the end user, right? So now we're talking about things I'm doing in the cloud, things I'm setting up in the cloud that are already part of my production workflow, already part of my streaming workflow, and I'm going serverless and I'm pushing them further down. And so that will bridge to the MEC, and that's where you will have the ability to carry out critical streaming functions or critical broadcast functions in real-time response to what the user is doing. So now you're talking about, now I can get to this sort of, what are these immersive opportunities? What are these cool things to do? That's a critical piece of infrastructure, and that is happening right now. And Amazon they're leading the charge on that.
Absolutely. And to watch and to just, we see them, this whole MEC idea of how that flows out to the edge, and these wavelength zones are going to become a critical part, and they're in that data center level of the network and in the transmission backbone. So the fact that you went as an industry into the virtualization process, you now have a seamless way to connect cloud to cloud and ultimately to global backbone.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've got a question here about the cloud, and perhaps you've covered this all, but you talked about the infrastructure being important. Much of this is software. Is there going to be a hit and delay here as people try to do a quote unquote lift and shift, but really need to become cloud native to realize the benefits of 5G?
Yes. You need to be cloud native, right? That's if you're having encapsulated, servers basically that are just virtualized instances, whether they're in Kubernetes or whether they're, Dockerized, doesn't matter. You still have inherent latency, especially in terms of elasticity. So let's say you need to spin up quickly. You're going to have latency, whether or not like you're in 5G. Moving to cloud native and moving things into serverless functions, you're getting rid of a lot of that latency, not all of it, but a lot of it in terms of scale and elasticity, right? You don't have to spin up an instance. There is no such thing as an instance. It is part of the cloud. And so that's really important to experience. And you need, in order to experience 5G, the sort of called latency-free 5G, you need to have a lot of those functions be serverless that will then be bridged to the MEC and become part of the MEC.
Yeah, I agree. We're starting this. We're going to find out what the lower boundaries of latency become. I mean, the network itself is, you can measure in sub 30 milliseconds or whatever you're going to need, but the reality of the supply chain and the signal path and multiple, but it's still not going to be a great tax. I mean, it's still going to mean think of where you are in satellite. You could be 45 seconds on a global, but even a national hop is, it's a couple minutes, and now all of a sudden we're going to be worried about, we're going to be 500 milliseconds or less anywhere we go.
That's crazy.
Right. Well,
anywhere.
Yeah, we've got a little less than 10 minutes left here, so let's sort of recap here and talk about the opportunities. What's the low-hanging fruit for the streaming and broadcast industries in terms of the opportunities that 5G is going to bring to them?
I mean, personally, I think the low-hanging fruit is IP production, right? It's get rid of SDI, get to using SRT as a contribution protocol, go total IP, and the fact that you have 5G, and again, maybe it's the question that was asked before, the Hollywood studios just saturating their studios with, with 5G. That's going to be the big opportunity for the industry. That's the low-hanging fruit. It's going to be the final thing that gets us to true IP broadcast production workflows. I don't know if Eric has a different opinion on what that.
I might put one small point and say, yeah, I'd use the Zixi protocol, but that's a
yeah, sorry, I said that wrong.
I'll take the SRT as well. We support SRT, we support risk, we support these things. But I do, well, like I said, if I was a betting person, and I see the production stuff rolling out for sure, but going forward, we're going to be the distribution side, as we touched on, the elimination of satellite is, kind of a no-brainer. Both from a cost perspective and a control perspective. So I think that's what's happening. And the fact that we now have 5G routers that are industrial strength and doing fine things in the field. And like I said, I will have numbers to share later this week, but we're going to be looking at 5 gigabits off a tower. I mean, this is like just incredible. And just, you're going to be pushing that in all different places. And the industry has gone through the necessary steps towards virtualization, even though a little Docker containerized stuff may be overstated, turning a box into a piece of software. However, we've been cloud native as a company from day one. I would say that the industry, these things come together. I utilize, it's like they talked about Wayne Gretzky, and always why we're so successful, because he goes where the puck is going. Well, you got about 6 pucks in motion and they're all coming to the same place. And this is good, and everyone's, it's very easy to be a skeptic. And I know I take a risk of being the optimist in this, but I'm watching these things happen. And I know what our company is doing with the likes of a Verizon and Amazon. These are very large scale companies that are moving at incredible speed to change this. And, if there's anything, the world's not getting slower. It's not. And this, we blew past Moore's law. That's not 18 months anymore. It's just, these things are going. So, I think that's, and then you look at the recent pressures, look at a Disney, Fox, look at the size and scale you need to be to compete with Netflix and pieces like that, and that amount of money. So you've got to change your methods of production. You've got to change your ability to hold consumer attention. You're going to have to weaponize your OTT and streaming offerings, and you're going to have a better experience at the QoE level.
I mean, and the big thing is like, this is happening, right? So unless a solar flare fries all the electronics on the planet, like this is going to happen. We are going to go to a giant 5G connected world. How fast it happens is, to Eric's point, right? It's just like, it's probably going to speed up exponentially over the next 12 to 18 months. I mean, we're going to see a lot of stuff rolling out. But again, that low hanging fruit, like, the industry can go after it. Right, it's there, and they can start making use of it. Especially if they have the budgets to do so. But yeah, next year, having this conversation, same time next year will be a different conversation.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned budgets.
Yes.
Because what are the economic benefits? You already talked, JT, about getting rid of satellite. But what are some of the other economic benefits that are going to come with 5G?
I mean, again, from my perspective, I think you can start talking about just production efficiency, right? So being able to, not cut people out, but being able to streamline processes so you get content to market faster. So you can obviously advertise faster. So there are some improvements to the way that we get content distributed to those endpoints that I think will, they will improve the bottom line and incrementally potentially generate more revenue. But I mean, for me, I can't get past how much money it saves to go all IP, like just to get rid of all the extraneous things we need to get content around places. And we're just making it available via this, really baked high bandwidth network.
I think I'll add to that and say that, what are the economics around this? So live production, as JT's saying, was in a control room. You had to go in a place and do a thing, and you got much higher. You're at 2110 and, all the new big, maybe your NDI out of that. But the back to the $6, one of the things that's finally came out, we probably accelerated with the pandemic live productions virtualization by 3 years. It would have got there eventually, but that had to happen overnight. The next part is take news and sports. It's the same workflow. It's just a different production value. But the head of news is super important and the head of sports is super important. But now those things are going to conjoin. And we already saw that begin to happen last year. So you're going to see and holding the idea of the consumer's attention with all the competing parts like YouTube and this and that and live and TikTok and Instagram, you've got to be able to put together broadcast television quality product that reaches an audience. And that's why we're pushing so hard also, in addition to the 5G, on the intelligent data platform and the AI/ML, because that's a force multiplier. You're going to be looking at ratios of like program channel to operator and program channel to engineer. And you're trying to figure out, because the demands on them is to do more. And how do you do more with the same infrastructure you have? Well, 5G means you don't have to think about the network in the way you did before. And that's going to just change. And then it's going to also change. And you're using tools like a Zixi to see how I delivered it and know I did it and know that I can machine learn my way to a better outcome across people. And again, we're in an industry that up until 10 years ago, the only way we knew how good the signal was a net return. We sent it to the master control and we brought it back to the truck. Now, we're not going to have to do that kind of thing. And you're going to be standing there with an iPhone versus a fly pack, and you're going to be changing the way you do your news, and you're going to be changing, and then all you have to do is drop in a 5G router. Oh, I just added distribution. This whole thing got cleaned up.
Yeah, and again, that's what's production workflow efficiencies. Like you get rid of things in the middle and everything is much more streamlined. You can reuse things that, once the content's digital, it's all IP, it's bits and bytes. The things you can do with it, you carve it out to lots of different places. Somebody's controlling that from an iPad, like that control room. It's in the cloud. Like, why does it need to be a physical place?
We were talking about the network operating center is now a bunch of screens on an iPad. So you got phones as production. My iPad's running it. Not sure. Puts a lot of pressure on infrastructure and buildings, but yeah.
Very cool.
Well, that's a great place to close. And I hope we've confirmed that 5G is not, in fact, meh. JT, Eric, thanks so much for your time. We had a bunch more questions in the Q&A. I will send those to both panelists.
Cool.
Some of them very, very technical and specific, some of them broader. But this has been a great discussion. And I want to thank you both and thank our audience for joining.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on. Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signiant. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signiant handles the rest. Get started on your Media Shuttle journey today. A journey without limits.